Hello, and welcome to Connecting Hawaii Business on ThinkTech Hawaii. My name is Kathleen Lee, owner of Kathleen Lee Consulting, and I am your host for this program. You can catch all of our ThinkTech Hawaii shows on thinktechhawaii.com as well as on ThinkTech Hawaii's Facebook and YouTube channel. For today, I am excited to introduce our guest. He is a multidisciplinary leader, and I would like for him to define that. We have Joy Barua, President and COO of Finance Insurance. Joy, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Aloha, everyone.
Well, thank you again for coming on, and I'm excited for you to talk about your experiences. And before we do that, could you introduce yourself to our viewers out there?
Sure. Once again, aloha, everyone. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm Joy Barua with Finance Insurance Limited, which is part of the Finance Factors family of companies. I'm the president and CEO of Finance Insurance Limited.
Wonderful. So I know when I first approached you for this interview, you had given me great guidelines on where to go about it. And when I do run into you and when I talk to you, you have a lot of ideas. So let's kind of whittle it down. What exactly is multidisciplinary leadership?
I think that's a great question. It's actually, if you think about leadership as being something that allows you to grow vertically in a certain field. So, for example, if you're pursuing a career in marketing, you work in firms, PR, sort of, the laterals, similar types of jobs, external affairs, and so forth, and you build a career. That's vertical. But when you do that across different industries, and also in different roles that are similar but in different sectors. So, for example, say you're doing marketing in the public sector versus doing marketing PR in the private sector. It could be for small or large business. You could also look at the expanded family of different roles that are similar to marketing. For example, external affairs, doing government relations, doing community relations, just to name a few among many. And I think in that process, you amass a lot more broader knowledge than being compared to when you would amass that knowledge, say, working just for a particular company over years. And so I think it helps you see things not only from different perspectives, but also at different levels, scales. Marketing, for example, as you know, it's all about audience engagement. And again, using that as a hypothetical example to illustrate my point, I think it just gives you a more robust, comprehensive view, and also opens doors to possibilities. And in that process, you become more integrated thinker, and your experience is also that much more amplified through the work that you do and the application of that. So that's just my quick and dirty. Of course, you could look at it in other ways. So throughout my career, I've held many different roles in the sort of leadership context. Of course, the functional areas. I was CFO, CEO, CMO, and obviously each and every one of them are different fields. So they're the functional diversity and learning those different disciplines, but also looking at it in different sectors. So being a CEO in an insurance company is very different from being the CEO and being at the helm running a nonprofit organization. And so, for me, that multidisciplinary is both across functions as well as industries. And I've learned a lot, and just to say that would be an understatement, but I'm blessed to have, found good meaning and true meaning behind what multidisciplinary truly means. It changes your views on things.
Let's run with that. So I have seen this on both ends, whether it is an individual looking to transition to from one sector to another, or companies who are hiring. So let me attempt to break down this question in two parts. As someone who is looking for, or in that leadership space, such as you have been, how does one go about in transitioning from one sector to another that may seem completely different? Like, for example, you went from private, right, from Kaiser, to government, which is the city, to now finance insurance. How does one go about in doing that? First part of the question. And I can do this with you because I know you're like, I already know you're thinking about this. So there's that part. And then on the employer part, how do you go about in recognizing that just because someone doesn't have leadership experience in, let's say, finance, but they have leadership in government, like somehow that can be um, transferable? Like, I don't know if you can, you kind of, you get the question, but the gist of it, right, on both ends.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Great question, by the way. So I think the first part of it is start by knowing that you don't have everything figured out. That's a given. You can never, even in a certain industry, if you're working, say you're going from company A to company B as the CEO, there are new things you learn, the people, the stakeholders. I mean, just everything will be different. So there's a certain aspect of newness that you have to balance with what you know. However, when you're looking at a completely different sector, obviously, there are, relatively speaking, there are a lot more unknowns. And I think it starts with building a healthy appetite to embrace uncertainty and being able to figure out things that you don't know and not being too hard on yourself, but also being authentic enough to admit what those things are that you don't know. And that would help you build healthy curiosity to learn those things objectively, openly, so that they can be meaningful learning experiences. And so, in that process, whether it's through an interview, which is the gateway you need to go through to sort of pitch yourself, one needs to be versatile enough and honest enough to be able to speak from, a place of being very transparent that here are the experiences I have, here are the experiences or certain qualifications I don't. However, here's how you're able to think about the portability of experiences or the applicability of these experiences that you have. So, for instance, if you are great at solving people problems, and even though you're not interviewing necessarily for an HR role or a people role, the fact that you know how to, it speaks to the greater picture about stakeholder management, understanding people, how your intuition works. And so being able to speak to that will communicate a lot about how you work with people. And it's less about the discipline itself. It's more about who you are as an individual and how you conduct yourself as a leader and how that speaks about your own unique, authentic self. And I think that goes a long way to demonstrate how you're willing to learn the new, because in leadership roles you're constantly in a state of what I would call a non-status quo mode. It's always different, and being able to demonstrate that is a great way to get in through the door. To the second part of your question, I think being able to figure things out and not being too hard on yourself, because you have to be able to chalk it up to learning experience. I'm sure we hear a lot about the normalization of failure as a great way to learn things, right? As a way to accumulate experience. And it's important that, not just say it, but believe it and live that discipline. And not that failure is your goal, but failure as a stepping stone to get to success. And so, with that, one becomes a leader that's committed to constant learning, if you will, whether it's the work, the industry, the stakeholders, the ever changing environment. And so, in today's world, more so than ever, being a dynamic leader, dealing with sort of the ever growing, ever evolving variables really helps differentiate those who have a better appetite, a better willingness to learn and adapt versus those who are less willing. I hope that answers your question.
It does, it does. But let's delve further into like the employer end. And I know you've had experience with that as well, with hiring people. Like,
Mhm.
how can employers go about in recognizing individuals that can be great leaders in in the industry that they're in, even if they don't have the background for that
Mhm.
particular sector?
Great point. There's always a first. Even great leaders will tell you where they started. And, in retrospect, there's always a great narrative or a story one could share about how it all started. So I think for employers, I think they have to be willing to take a leap of faith. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would want leaders to show up with a sign saying "I'm qualified," and it's a copy and paste, pretty obvious. People are out there, but seldom that's the case, as we all know. For those who are employers, I would just encourage employers to be more mindful about being more open-minded. we hear a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is definitely a part of it. And more than just using it as a way to report statistics about how you hire people with certain demographic profile and so forth. Beyond that, being able to speak to what you don't know, and I actually do a lot of behavioral interviews. Behavioral interviewing in addition to the typical interview, the cookie cutter sort of the HR questions that you do, because it tells you a lot about someone's willingness and how they would fit in. Because on paper, the pedigree is oftentimes there if you meet the minimum qualifications, whether it's the tenure, the degree you need to have, et cetera, licensing. But when you actually meet someone, it'll tell you the difference between someone that could be, you know, shows up, interviews perhaps very well on paper, but how do you sort of try to get to that point of discerning whether or not they would be a good fit? Do they have the mental stamina, the leadership stamina, the willingness to kind of embrace the challenge? So for employers, I think from a diversity standpoint, what you don't know, there's no such thing as a perfect business, right? Which is why we are in a niche, right? You're good at something, you're not good at everything. Question is, what do you want to be good at? What skill sets, what leadership attributes is necessary for you to bridge that gap to get to that point of excellence, whether it's your short-term strategic plan or long-term, and being able to then distill it down to how you hire and select people. And so I think more than just treating it as you do a bunch of interviews and select people, you have to be very intentional and engaged in that process. And you can never discount the importance of diversity in that regard. Yeah. So for on the flip side, as employers are sort of working on that, and I would encourage employers to do more of that. Prospective employees should try to think about how they can differentiate themselves. We're all unique human beings. We're all unique individuals. I'm not sure that professionally we give ourselves enough credit when we show up to express that differentiation. And whether it's simple things like, oh, I love to use humor as a way to express myself, or kind of do the ice breaking, or what have you. Those are attributes that, and we oftentimes keep guarded and we stay reserved. I think what's the worst thing that can happen? You just won't get a job, perhaps. Again, worst case scenario. But being able to just bring that about up front so that you can, my way of expressing it is you can expedite the honeymooning phase and get straight down to who you are. And the fastest you can get there, the quicker you're able to decide whether or not that employer is the right fit for you, just as much as that employer can decide whether or not you're the right fit for them. And it's a process of discovery. You move on to the next opportunity, and over time, all you're accumulating is experience, which is really awesome over time. And you make a start somewhere and make the best out of it. Your environment is truly your playground. And, you have to be able to look at everything as your raw materials, and that would determine how resourceful you are. So I'll give you an example. When I started my first job, as I was talking to you, it sort of came to mind. I was working in a nonprofit doing an internship. There was an opportunity to write a business plan so that I would have a full-time job, which is the equivalent of writing a grant. Now, freshman year of business school, you don't learn about business plans. You're doing your sort of freshman classes. But I was intrigued by the opportunity to, hey, this thing could actually land me a job. And so we didn't have Google back then where I could, look at sample business plans and that sort of thing. So long story short, I ran around town, talked to people from the Small Business Development Center, to people I knew, people who I even didn't know, but knew that they are a great resource. And the aggregation of all that encounters and the learning, I was able to put into a business plan. And long story short, the business plan did get funded, and I had a full-time job. And I'll admit that my first job as a project manager, I was really mesmerized by the title. Oh, wow, I'm a manager. Maybe I don't need to go to school anymore. But that set the tone for me, and it was sort of a validation to myself that, hey, I did this, and imagine what else I could do. And it just sort of started the process. So, there's hit and miss, but you have to be able to start somewhere, and don't be afraid to start, because if you don't start, there's not a journey to be talked about or to be had or experienced.
That's a good one, Joy. I feel like I should put that like on a poster or a bookmark or something. But that's great. And thank you for sharing that story. We are going to go on a short break, but when we return, Joy, I would love for you to delve more into making connections with people, starting with networking. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Connecting Hawaii Business on ThinkTech Hawaii. Today we have Joy Barua, President and COO of Finance Insurance, talking about multidisciplinary leadership and creating genuine connections with people. So, Joy, when we left off, we were talking about how you had created something for yourself and you made connections by reaching out to people. And I would love for you to talk about networking. So let's bring up the first slide about networking. And Joy, thank you again for sharing your top 10. I'm sure you have more. Could you go over these points? I know I took out some, but the point is that these are your very back to basics tip. First five.
Sure. So if it's okay with you, I'll actually start with the numbers 2 through 5.
Absolutely.
Using social media, that's a given. I think, we live in a ever digital world, and it's a great way to stay in touch, real time, no time zone, across time zones and so forth. On that note, as far as professional contacts and relationships are concerned, LinkedIn is actually a great tool. And a couple of reasons why. One, obviously, I call it the Facebook for professionals. But you can go in there, you can connect with people, you can search people. Yeah, and once you build a network, you can actually sort them, which is pretty cool. By industry, network, you just type in a keyword. So, for example, if you're looking for someone in banking, you type in bank and you will see all your banking contacts. It's pretty neat. The other reason why I also like LinkedIn is you can actually follow groups or topics of interest. For example, I follow Phil Johnson's emotional intelligence, or EQ as it's known. That's a topic that intrigues me quite a bit. And that's just one among many topics I follow. So when you do that every day, what will happen is when you log back in, you will get alerts about that topic, what's happening in sectors, that discipline and field. It's a great way to stay abreast on of the topic and the field and the practice and so on and so forth. The other is also thinking about the network of networks. So when you're connecting with people, and they have their own networks just as you do, and as your network grows, so does theirs, and vice versa, because they get to. So, for example, if they give you a recommendation or endorsement of a certain skill, and by the way, there are many in LinkedIn, it helps you get cross exposed or cross exposure, if there is such an expression, across their networks, and also um, fields or sectors tied to those words or skill sets. So really, it's a great way to build what I call a dynamic network. And then also, of course, you can always schedule a meeting, get in touch with people. And one of the things I like to do, given that my career of 2.5 decades has been sort of all over the place in so many different sectors and disciplines, I love learning new things. So oftentimes, what I'll do is I'll try to fool the algorithm. I'll try to dabble on a certain topic a little too long because I want more free content. And so I get that content because I'm trying to learn. And why pay for something if you're getting it for free? So again, LinkedIn is a great tool. So that's social media. And if you could put up the list again, I just want to make sure. Thank you. And then, of course, it's important that you keep your presence up to date. Um, um, so your job, make sure it's current. I mean, that's basic, right? Goes without saying. But if you were ever recognized for something or you did a project, to the extent it doesn't violate any privacy or there are no confidentiality um, issues, you can post that a project there. You can upload a file. It's just the same as attaching an attachment. I mean, uploading an attachment. But you can also list an award that is tied to maybe a particular job or a project you worked on. So it gives you a lot more dynamic exposure based on that. And then next on the list is, let's see, keeping it casual and just having a conversation. I mean, it's as easy as that. So oftentimes what I do is I don't overly prepare. I just go in with my innate curiosity to, when I meet someone, I mean, there are the basic, hey, what do you do? Oh, by the way, and Hawaii being a small place, whether you like it or not, you will find nexus points. Oh, yeah, I know somebody and somebody. You want to have someone from that company. Or, or we sit on the same community board. So I don't think in Hawaii you have to do too much work to find that connection. And even if you don't, it's okay. I mean, then it just means that there is so much more you get to learn about each other. So don't be too shy. I mean, believe it or not, I'm actually an introvert, but I'm type adaptive, so I can switch. And it's something I learned as I learned to open myself up to people, because when you open yourself up, people open up to you. So it's a two-way street. And so through that, I built up a network, pretty vast network on LinkedIn, which is I have about 26,000 followers, and then about
Oh,
26, just about the same amount of connections, but they span boundaries across, around the world. I've had former students that I met during my, lecture tenure at Hawaii Pacific University, teaching the MBA program. My students who are running companies, and we stay in touch, and it's great. I just enjoy it. And then it also has a lot of tools built in LinkedIn, for example, where you can congratulate people. So you don't have to remember people's birthdays, their work anniversaries. If they get promoted, automatically the notifications come about. And it's a great way to stay in touch, even though you might not have seen them for decades. So, and then I think the last one on the list, if you wouldn't mind putting that up, is following up, just making sure that I think it, because of all these auto features, there are great ways. If you have a vast network like I do, I make it a point that, I'm sending them work anniversary wishes and so forth. Every morning when I wake up, that's one of the things I do. And end of the day. The reason why I do it twice is because of time zones, international, you wish someone a happy birthday. They're like, oh, that was 2 days ago. I'm sorry, I'm in Hawaii. So anyway, you get the idea. So the very
I do.
first point in there, I do want to expand on that a little bit, which is why I saved, I guess you could say, the best for last. So putting time into your existing network, which you probably already have, your high school friends that you met, they all have their careers or doing something. And then your social relationships, don't take them for granted. You may, so let's say you serve on a nonprofit board, or maybe you volunteer with them. They have a board, a governance entity who are all made up of volunteers. They are representative of our business community leaders. Get to know them, talk to them. It's a great way to access a network that you're already given. Beyond just doing your, which is great, doing your usual volunteer work for the nonprofit and so forth. And just imagine if you meet 12 people who are influential business leaders, leaders, you get to tap into them for advice. They could also become potentially your sources of professional references, mentorship. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Now, you take that scenario and you multiply it by if you were involved in, say, 3 organizations. Imagine the automatic network you already have, the default that we often take for granted, but we're not necessarily working the network that already exists around us. People love Facebook for, it's a great way to stay connected with friends and people you met in high school and so forth. Like, imagine if you thought about it a little bit more intentionally about, hey, my high school friends, I wonder where they're working. And, being able to make that because you already know them, you've had an experience, right? You've gotten to know them. Now you get to know them in a different context. So again, just looking for those opportunities as a great way to build the asset, the network you already have. And once you see it, how it actually works in a dynamic way, your network builds exponentially a lot quicker. Yeah. So I hope that's helpful in terms of some of the highlights. Um,
Yeah,
in
I
some
did split it up. So
of
I do
no
apologize
worries.
that I didn't go over that. Can we pull up the third slide? Because when you were talking, I noticed that you already went over this, so it looks like you know this like the back of your hand. Is there anything else in here? I know the first one you kind of already mentioned for the first point to share with people information that you think may
Yep.
be of value to them. But let's
So
pull up that third slide again.
mhm.
And Joy, if there's anything in there that you want to pull or highlight even further.
You know, let's see. I would say the first one there, proactively sharing information that you think would be useful to others. So, for example, um, say just off the top of my head, and it's going to be for confidentiality reason, it'll be part hypothetical, part real. So let's say there's a public sector leader, uh, and the individual is the chair of a certain committee, and there are some development. Now they're lawmakers, right? They're reacting to information that they're given, and they're making decisions and so forth. And maybe you are in that particular industry and you're doing some work that might be of benefit to them, and it just hasn't hit the media yet, or maybe you're still in the prototypical testing phase or what have you. It might be helpful to share with them what that work is. And that may spark some conversation. They may involve other stakeholders. And before you know it, this idea that you were contemplating, evolving, growing, working on, what have you, maybe now you have more people to react to it. Or it could have the opposite effect where, or a different way of looking at that impact where, hey, you know what? You were thinking about this project that would impact 100 people. Imagine if you did it district wide. We're talking about 20,000 lives touch with resourcing. So the conversations you never know where a simple, what may seem like a, meaningless, just people talking may lead to something great. So don't ever discount yourself by thinking that, that they're limited simply because people have their titles and defined roles. So I would, along those lines, say that maybe you share that information proactively. Now I know that that's a very specific example. Other examples maybe a certain banker sits on a board and they know anything and everything about there is to know about banking, but perhaps in community, the financial, the economic and financial crises that people are having. Maybe you have data. Maybe you're a nonprofit leader that you're seeing certain trends evolving, and you could share that with that individual, but don't automatically assume they know everything there is to know. They may know about their niche or the type of banking they do, and it never hurts. So when you proactively share that information, they appreciate not only the fact that you've shared it, but also how it shows initiative in you anticipating a potential need they have. And that's a great way to start what I call a value added relationship, where you start to build trust. Trust doesn't just happen by saying, please trust me. I mean, it has to be demonstrated through action. So, again, I know that that's, again, a different and yet specific example, but great way to show how you can be helpful to others. Don't automatically assume that just because you don't have a fancy title or a big title or you're not up in the hierarchy that you have nothing valuable to offer. You never know what people may need. I mean, that's how I have learned by, I love sharing, so I'm always oversharing, and through that process, I've learned about what to share, when to share, and I mean, it's a learning experience, right? But over time, it helped me build a network of trusted advisors, thought partners, and also where I need advice, I have go-to folks, and they're not necessarily always the obvious subject matter experts or SMEs, but they're also people that have very different perspectives on things because they have dabbled in, again, going back to the multidisciplinary aspect. Your big picture is probably not as big as where their big picture. But it's amazing when you talk and you learn, it's just, oh wow. There's always that sort of healthy curiosity, that wow factor. Yeah. So be proactive, always reach out, be helpful. People won't express I mean, when you share something willingly, people will always be grateful. It may or may not come to, it may or may not be useful to them. That's fine. It's the simple act of sharing that's a great conversation starter and a great way to build value added relationships. Yeah.
I appreciate that. This is a question that I thought about when I was reading your bio. So you have been, you've received a lot of accolades and awards over the years, whether it's you're well through your professional efforts, through your personal efforts with boards and involvement in charitable causes. You know, we're talking like 20 for the next 20, 40 under 40. And I've had this conversation before with other people as well. How would one go about in being recognized for their efforts, whether at work or, outside of that, without compromising the idea of humility?
Okay. Terrific question. I love it. I think if you focus on building your professional brand through what you do, the awards and accolades they automatically follow. Now, one may say that, well, that's easier said than done. Well, that speaks to the authenticity of how you find the balance to answer your question. The humility with needing to be differentiated and be known for something. I think if you pursue an award, you may or may not get it. But the question is, what does that award represent? If it's simply a fixture in your mind and a feather in the hat, for lack of a better expression, it'll remain exactly that. Without naming any names, there are a lot of folks that have been recognized for a lot of things. The question is, did it really create a meaningful impact? Because the meaningful impact you leave behind is what people will remember you for. The award is just sort of sort of the envelope that actually holds the money or the validation, if you will. So I think for me, I'll share this without mentioning my nominating organization. When I was first nominated 40 under 40, the first question I asked was, "What does it come with?" And by the way, I didn't know much about 40 under 40 back then. This is at least 14 years ago, 15, give or take.
Joy, you
And
just gave away how old you are. Come on.
not exact date though, but I guess one could extrapolate. So one of the first things I asked was, "Does it come with money?" And the answer was no. "Does it come with free Hawaiian miles?" No. "Well, you get a free dinner out of it." it's anyway. But the fact that someone sees value in you and wants to have you recognized because they've seen that is sort of the ultimate validation instead of you just going and nominating yourself. And not that there's any harm in doing that, but for me, it's been mostly nominated by external organizations or my employers or community organizations where I serve. And so I think my the way I've grown up, I learned to be more selfless in giving up my time, talent, and resources. And so naturally for me, it happened. The evolution of accumulating awards and recognitions has been a different journey than perhaps others where maybe you're in a certain industry. And one needs to ask themselves, what is my benchmark of excellence? And you don't have to figure it out for your entire career. Where do you want to go, and being able to quantify that somehow in a tangible way. So whether it's an award, whether it's you're the youngest to do something. I mean, there are so many different ways to brand oneself, right? Professional branding. I think keeping that in mind will help you be more intentional than just pursuing awards simply to sort of add more add more to your resume and brand. And I think the more you enact that authentically. So, for example, if you're known for someone that does a lot of community service, it's not a question of if, sooner or later. I mean, you are recognized, you are valued. And there are people who will recognize you for that. But if you make recognition the ultimate goal, you won't get past that. So always think beyond, and those are just things you pick up on the way. Imagine it's sort of like being on a bus tour and stopping by many lunch wagons along the way, picking up food. But really, it's the journey that you're enjoying, not just fixated on one particular lunch wagon. I know it's an awkward analogy, but that's the way I look at it. And I think it'll just help you have a more authentic brand. And brand is a lot of times when I ask people, by the way, what's your professional brand, oftentimes you will hear them just tell you their job title. That's not your brand. You're just mentioning the job you have for the employer where you work. What do you stand for? And it's in a constant state of evolution. You will need to ask yourself. So today it may be, oh, I love volunteering. Tomorrow it may be, I love volunteering, but I want to make a difference in a certain sector. So over time, as we aggregate experience, we learn more about ourselves and the world. I think it helps us figure out what it is and who it is that we represent. And and branding is not what you call yourself, it's how people perceive you. Very important distinction. You may think that you're the best, I don't know, finance person, but most people think of you as, nah, you're a very transactional person. So your assessment of yourself and who you represent, there may be a big gap between that and how you're broadly perceived. And that perception is built based on your authentic practice of self and just doing it consistently. Yeah.
So many gems today from this conversation, Joy. Let's pull up that last slide. If people would like to get a hold of you, is this the best way to go about it?
Yes, absolutely. I'm pretty accessible. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. One of the reasons why my personal email, and it's not here, which is on LinkedIn, is locate Joy. People are always looking for me, so
I get it. Okay.
But
I
yeah,
wondered about
get in
that.
touch with me. Anything I can do to help, always happy to. That's me. And thank you for having me in the show, Kathleen. Really appreciate the time.
Of course, absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to add that I may have missed?
No, I think you've been pretty exhaustive, and you've asked a lot of questions, so I appreciate that. I think the one last thing I would perhaps leave a thought behind is me personally. My personal motto is I aspire to inspire, I live to give, and so I try to instill that in others as much as possible, and that's how I have found my meaning, my sort of north, my compass, what I stand for, my purpose in life, and everything. So I hope that we can find that for ourselves, and I wish all the viewers the best. And thank you. Thanks again for this opportunity. It was a pleasure.
It was our pleasure, Joy. Thank you again for being on the show. Joy Barua, President and COO of Finance Insurance. Thank you also to Jay Fidel and the staff at ThinkTech Hawaii for making programs like this possible. Today we had Eric and Haley who helped us with this program. Until next time, aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.